All right, dear viewers, glad to see you on Feigin Live. It's Saturday, 30th of April, tonight, 10 p.m. in Moscow, day 66 of war. We have Alexey Arestovych, the usual guest. Glad to see you, Alexey, likewise. We have several 100,000 people watching us. Even though you throw darts at me for advertising, please subscribe to this channel. Also subscribe to Alexey's channel. If you're listening to that in English, subscribe to the Privateer station, and please do not forget to leave the like, because that helps to promote this media to wider audiences via YouTube algorithms. All right, Alexey, let's start with the usual. What are the news? We have quite a bit of new developments. Okay, I'm writing down. Now let the guys who are listening to us on the other side do the recording function. All right, friends. It's been 4 days, generally, that we have not observed any movement from the territory of Russia into Ukraine, especially in the direction of the main offensive. There is a steady flow back. Hospital vehicles taking wounded, a lot of vehicles taking dead ones back, because just recently we had 2 hits in Izum, 1 hit in Pervomaisky, command of airborne troops, command of another army, just at minimum be 100 dead bodies in one command post, 200 in the other, at least 100 in the third. Some people are saying could be up to 300, but even conservative, it's about 400 high-ranking officers. Some support personnel, but for the most part, high-ranking officers. So that slows down the advancement. Every time you take the command post out, the army stalls for a few days. And without fresh support, fresh reinforcements from Russia, the whole offensive is struggling to continue. So, preliminary data that the head of airborne command post is dead. Is that Simonov? No, Simonov is the head of the General Army, and we're not naming names yet. We're verifying, but at least we slowed their pace. We hit them off the high horse, and now they're losing their tempo. You can see that in their actions, and also the quality of reinforcement has been pretty bad recently. So in the last 2 or 3 weeks, they threw several thousand people into the fire. They crossed the border from Russia to Ukraine, and I'm picking words here. These several thousand people are people with low societal responsibilities. How do you determine that? Are they tattoos, or did you capture them? I don't know all the details how we determine that, but our observations is they're, first of all, simple infantry. They are not artillery, they are not tanks. They're just plugging infantry holes with that new kind of troops. After a week, they probably have 30% left, because some of them flee, some of them die. And I have to mention that there are a lot of people refusing to even fight on the Ukraine territory in Russia, so that is a problem with the Russian army. A lot of people are just writing their resignations. And that's the problem with the whole offensive. Without the proper support, without the proper command, even the troops that they still have, they are losing the initiative, they're losing the spirit. Without additional support in the direction of the main offensive of that campaign, in the last 4 days, there was not a single significant event. So, wait, what is the Ukrainian command estimate on that direction. When they started, they had about 25,000. I know we cleared them substantially. Their successes are, or semi-successes on one hand, are tactical, so very low level, and the losses are operative, much higher level. And it appears that that offensive broke its sharp tip, and they have no power to continue forcing it. Also, they are approaching the water barriers, and crossing that every time is a sophisticated military operation. So that appears that they may be running out of steam. And I'm posing questions to myself if they're really done with advancing here. That reminds me of an old, inappropriate joke about the master trying to play words, create or push out the stone flower. So they're somewhere in that position trying to push out something, but it's not happening. At the same time, on Gulay Pole down south, they're concentrating and they're trying to, or attempting to, continue their operation. Problem is, it is very hard to hide in the steppe. So we see them, and whenever we see them, then artillery starts reaching them, and many other things happen to them in that area. Also, special forces are working that we have. They're hitting the reinforcement columns and convoys, and they're also destroying some of their soldiers who strayed away from the main force. So right now the tempo is stalling. We are trying to capitalize on that. We're hitting their reserves, hitting their munition depots, and hitting their command posts. So for now, it appears that Russia is swinging for $1 and hitting for a few cents. They also wanted to advance to Kryvyi Rog, but we keep hitting them, which prevents them from doing any serious offensive. I know yesterday they had 3 good hits. We had 3 good hits on them. Today too. And they cannot do anything to our artillery reaching them there, so they're trying to punish Nikolaev and just shooting at that city and reaching the outskirts of it. But I had a feeling for the last 2 days, in the war events, your intuition sharpens, and very often you get the premonition of things that's going to happen because your subconsciousness keeps processing a ton of data and preparing you for possible outcomes. So now one can, with a high degree of reality, state that they are broken on the Zoom direction. In Zaporozhye, they still have a little bit of advancement potential, but they're not really using it. And in Kherson area, they're pretty beat down. They're not doing anything active. So that crazy adventure that I mentioned before, that Putin tried to pull through, will not succeed. And right now they already see on the horizon the operative defeat, which basically equals in this case to a strategic defeat. 66 days, not a single Russian detachment can boast that they accomplished the operative task. Only some detachments somehow managed to achieve some tasks that they were given, but that is minor. And looking at the general stats, everything looks pretty bad for Russian army. It is a catastrophe. I have one more military question for today. Where are those mighty reserves that were in Novgorod region, about 15,000 troops? That's the problem, that they are not sending military personnel from Russia. What they're sending people whom they picked up from the overpass, washed them a little, gave them the machine gun in their hands, and sent them to front. And even them, just several thousand. All right, let's continue from here. We have 318,000 people watching us. No, let's not go yet. Let's stay here and feel the greatness of the moment. Take a break and have a smoke, if you do. They're really slowing down. It might take about a week to completely stall Gulay Polya and Kherson groups, and that means that Russian army has lost the potential for advancement in Ukraine. After that, we're switching to defense. They are switching to defense. And Putin will have nothing to announce on the 9th of May, their favorite World War II holiday, besides the fact that Russian army is not advancing anymore. They're doing a little bit of tactical movement, but in general, they're not advancing. That means it cannot achieve the goals of campaign. They have not reached the real borders of Lugansk and Donetsk regions. Even in Kherson, they have issues. The second question is what to do next. And the main question starting to loom on the horizon when the Ukrainian army will go into offensive itself. We're doing some of it. So in Kharkiv region, we cleared 4 villages from the occupants. Very interesting direction if you want to explore the map. And for the last 4 days, Russian army had no resupplies. And they lost 2 generals. Can you name them? No, not yet. We're verifying. Just understand that this is not strictly about a certain general or something. This is about the centers that were managing the troops on the front. They are destroyed now, so they need new troops to replace the dead ones. They need to figure out what to do then. I mean, seriously, if you look at that kind of detachment, you look at their command post. If the command post is destroyed, all the initiative, all the people who are making decisions are gone. There could be some clerks still left outside, but... And those people who are listening to us and who know a bit about the military job, they understand the beauty of what's happening. Now, why do you think we hit those command outposts at the time when we did that? We could have done it sooner. It is pretty simple. When they were starting to break, including the morale and the capability to achieve their current objectives, so the command had to make a decision to really change something within the troops, change the tasks, or report up to Moscow that it's unachievable. So any army which cannot achieve its tasks is basically looking up to the command post to hear what are we doing next. And at that moment is when we hit them. What happens after, when the command posts get wiped out at this moment? The loss of control, the loss of management. Exactly, that's what's happening in the Russian army right now. I need to say that our guys do know how to fight. I'm watching that time and time again. Ukrainian military... I have to repeat, I am a military connoisseur, and I got really high standards, hard to satisfy my things. But I'm looking at what's happening. What they're doing is a very respectable level of fighting. I take my hat off. This is beautiful, and this is right on time. Just as a military person observing that, it's almost like you're listening to a very expensive, well-tuned, well-played together orchestra. When things happen so right on time and so effectively that it's delightful. I started to get some joy when we actually were pushing them back near Kiev and were successful in creating a few kill boxes for them. So there was a day before the massive advancement onto Kiev when our troops actually counter-hit them, preceding the offensive and trying to take a couple of important spots, which totally distracted Russian forces from doing a massive offensive on Kiev. Back then I started noticing that somebody might be really talented there. And now I'm looking at that, I'm seeing the level of professionalism grows, really grows. And sometimes you look at things happening, especially when there's something slacking, you look at our troops and think, oh, maybe we're gonna lose here, but then you see how they regrouped, how they counterattacked, and how they did something else, and it's really inspirational. So we're suspecting that the time when they cannot advance anymore will come sooner. Maybe not entirely too early, but maybe 1 week before that we predicted. So that could actually be on that infamous 9th of May Russian holiday when they lose the capacity to continue this war. That'll be something. Well, so I guess that's it for the general news. Yes, generally that's about it. Mariupol, which we cannot not mention. So I'm not saying anything about that humanitarian corridor that was announced today. It was announced that there'll be one for the civilians, but we're staying quiet and waiting for results. So Mariupol, we take it off the list. You understand, people in chat are asking all the questions. And, I personally took it upon myself to remember about Mariupol in almost every interview. Any new information about Gerasimov, the head of the Russian command? That would have been too simple. There is a slight hope we hit 3 command posts close to the war-fighting action. There is a slight hope he might have been there, but that's a little too wishful thinking. Because, if somebody in Moscow got a whiff of that, people would be starting to spill that in social media and everywhere. It is impossible to hide such a piece of news, even in the Putin's Russia, so yeah, probably not. But let's see, a very important event, in my opinion, happened. Lavrov, Russian minister of Foreign Affairs, is giving an interview to a Chinese newspaper, and they're asking him what's happening on the negotiations. So I understand the situation when you cannot discuss certain things and Mikhail Podolyak can. You have a division of who does what. Unlike that, Lavrov starts talking about everything. And in between his description, he poses a question that we also would want to have some sanctions lifted. He is not clarifying which ones, but we understand that these are probably the ones that were adopted later. So people got surprised that they're asking to lift some of the sanctions after that infamous phrase by Putin that we'll get to heaven and all of our enemies will go to hell. So people are gleefully joking. Are you going to paradise, or are you just moving your command to a different place and trying to negotiate for better options? So what I see here is that Moscow really wants to get the sanctions lifted. Do I understand that this is a part of a negotiation? The answer is you understand it right, but this is not a part of negotiation. Lavrov said one very important thing. He spilled. This is to answer the question of those who are afraid of nuclear war. The ones who are afraid, they actually are the ones asking for lifting of the sanctions and looking forward to find better ways for living. So it is pretty simple. After that talk show, after that interview, he will be patted on the back and told that Alexey Viktorovich, the diplomat career is difficult, but after these words that you said, it'll be really hard to scare the rest of the world with nuclear war. Because your questions, they pose a direction that you want to survive and you want to stay alive later. So, also Michael Podolyak recently made a statement that he was asking the Russian side to try to be normal humans and try to follow certain rules and not throw in the data that is completely incongruent with reality, parallel to negotiations. Because, first of all, Ukraine is not the author of these vetoes that you guys don't like. You need to resolve that with the countries that decided to introduce them. So you need to reach out to them, to every one of them, and work with them to try to alleviate that situation. So for now, as long as the conditions for the sanctions remain, meaning Russian troops are still in Ukraine, no sanctions can be lifted. Now, addressing the sanctions, we have Yermak, who is a very good professional in our office. He knows how to work and he's very pedantic. He is working with sanctions with love and pace and follow-up. So right now we're getting to pretty interesting moments that they're also uncovering secondary or even third step down from the sanction that people are using to circumvent their limitations. And this will be bringing a lot of effect. And here, they're concentrating on the sanctions not as a general thing that could be avoided or could be circumvented or figured out how to live with. They're actually also tracing secondary and tertiary waves and options that are on the table to get the sanctions to stick to Russia. It's almost like using those deep water charges on a submarine. Bam, bam. And when it happens all together, it actually gives a higher effect that every individual bomb or step would do in this case. So here Ukraine acts as a consultant who is asking the West to use that data as weapon. But the sanctions themselves, they are put on Russia by the West. Ukraine has nothing to do with the sanctions. They cannot make us do that. They actually requested on the negotiations if we can lift them. And our legit answer was that we do not have that capacity. Because right now, a lot of things that we would not have paid earlier attention to about Russian troops and issues and stuff after Bucha and Mariupol, that is done. So right now, Russia is presenting their wishes and wants as the subject of negotiations. Not true. Even back in the last turnaround, these wishes were just wishes. They were not on the table. They wanted to put that on the table, but our side rejected. And they can ask for anything. The thing is, that doesn't mean that that'll happen. And now after Bucha and Mariupol and other things, their only option is to really flee the territory of Ukraine, and we'll think if they get punished for that or not. I want to say that by itself, it's a universal methodology that you hit the thing which they are afraid of. So sanctions is one of those things. And if Lavrov is tracing that and bringing up the sanctions matter, we probably should be concentrating on sanctions a bit more. And try to make them more intensive, deeper, and more painful for the recipients. And a refresher, I am a bit of a connoisseur in many processes, and when I see how they do these sanctions, I can tell that they're really thinking them through. They know what they're doing. They're people of a really high professional level. And again, yeah, in such cases, I would take my head down and say, respect people for what you're doing. And knowing Yermak, he is one of those. If he is digging somewhere, he will dig and he will find it. All right. There is a question about Angelina Jolie. Many people ask, and frankly, it's a good matter for Saturday to discuss. I need to mention that Russia has lost the culture war as well. They usually lose culture wars, and I saw that when I was defending Pussy Riot group after their political action in Russia. Their attitude is different there. They treat actors and celebrities as waitresses, as people who do not do anything productive. But they're completely missing the point that these people create an atmosphere that leads to practical decisions. Because Angelina, on one hand, is a movie star, is a famous diva. Do you understand, right, that she came to Lviv and then she will continue to Kiev? I have no idea where she will continue with her trip. And Yermak, our guy who is doing the sanctions, he invited her. He's actually a movie producer in the civil life. So, what I wanted to say is that it's an interesting story. If you wish, I can talk about that. The first day of war, at the press conference of journalists, me and Michael Podolyak are doing the first briefing. I'm going down the steps from the podium, and I bump into a foreigner, and I very gently push him aside and please tell him, please let me pass. He turns and looks at me. It is Sean Penn. You did not recognize him? Well, not from his back. When he turned, I did. So I said, nice to meet you, Sean. Briefly hugged, yeah. He was in our office earlier, before the war, so we made acquaintance then. Sean Penn is 3 times Oscar winner. What they don't get in Moscow, that celebrities and movie stars are just like waitresses and strippers. Come here, I'll put you $100 in your panties. They didn't get it that in the West, politics is a chemistry. And very top-level executives sometimes very often do not need to have more than 15% of hard skills. 85% of that is soft skills, people skills. That's how many decisions are made. Imagine American senator. Angelina Jolie calls him, and he's, of course, a human who watched Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who knows who she is, and she calls him and says, Senator, they told me in Ukraine, I saw the soldiers, the wounded kids, and they're telling me that they really need howitzers. And he hears her trembling voice, and, she can make a great appeal to him. Please help, as mother, as woman. So, what would be his reaction? In Russia, they suspect that he can just tell her to F off. In America, of course not. He likely will, or might ask her for a picture. together, because my grandson really loved a movie with you, Lara Croft or something. Sure, and at the same time she would be asking him in return, but you will still help with the howitzers. Yeah, of course, we'll do what we can. And then things happen, things are put in motion. And these are Hollywood stars. Among them, there are a lot of Hollywood producers who also manage millions of dollars in cash flows, and you cannot dispense their opinion lightly. Many people in states do not dismiss them based, politicians in states do not dismiss them based on what they do, but people tend to look at the budgets and the numbers and your output. So if you are a big producer, you will have weight in society. So in Russia, they don't understand that that layer of society can pull and push things around. Yeah, imagine Jolie going back to States saying, hey, I was there. We already have seen videos where she with people are fleeing from the aerial bombardment, and the video is already there. So, and imagine she gathering more Hollywood stars, requesting congressmen of the United States to provide more help to Ukraine. So they can do that. And in Russia, they don't get it. They think if it is a dissenting opinion or something they don't like, they can just ignore it. And in states, again, if a congressman is not... Congressman needs to pay attention to such a situation, because there are elections coming in November, and if he did not support the situation in Ukraine, resolution for that, he can be met with his voters in the hall and ask questions. You said no to that petition? Why are you doing that? Because, you're just a congressman, and these people who signed the petition, they're well known to each of us, and, my kids love Lara Croft, and Fight Club is my favorite movie, and, how these things work in the United States are different from how they work in Russia. And these people understand that these chains of events and the meanings of her visit, meaning of their presence and their push, the value of that they are part of a huge machine that can make things happen. You can treat masses and people and movies the way you like, but people who work with movies, people who work with these millions of cash flow, they know how to work with reality, and they know how to cause things and how to make things happen. So most active of them never despise the reality, they work with it. If you see somebody who despises the reality, the basis of despising it is actually fear. So if you see somebody who is doing that, they're afraid. So whenever Russian KGB and politicians demonstrate that they despise audiences or certain society groups, they're basically signing off, resigning that they're afraid of those groups. And they're breaking the reality. And that's partly what caused Putin's regime demise, that they despised a lot of their own population, despised their own political groups in the country, in their own country, who were pushing back. And they broke their relation to the actual reality. They started to live in the alternative universe. So that's what they also missed about Zelensky. Zelensky's past, he was a comedian back in the day. Side note, it's a Russian Last Comic Standing show version, a group version of it, where there are groups of them playing against each other. So Zelensky was the leader of Quarter 95, a very famous group, and the owner of that show gave an ultimatum to Zelensky about some dispute. Basically said, you're either following or I kick you out. And they were already in the final. They were one of the two remaining teams standing. So Zelensky disagreed, did not follow this pressure, and the owner of that show, they rigged things, so all the fans saw that this team was stronger. They were voted down, and kicked down. They did not win that round, that year. So Zelensky, he was at that time was 28, I think. He takes his team out of that show. He creates his own machine, his own program in Ukraine, continues being famous, creates a very successful business, goes back to Russia on the political satire, earning money there, and then a few years later, his project keeps earning millions over in Ukraine, working on the satire against the regime. So, if you really go in details of that situation, they would have seen that he is a strong personality, unbreakable one who does not want to bend. So it is not Putin who is playing Zelensky. It is Zelensky who is playing Putin. And in order to understand what will be if they invade Ukraine, they needed to analyze another thing. The defense of Donetsk airport back in the day, back in 2014. If you analyze these two episodes, they would have understood that there is no chance to win in Ukraine. But they believe that Zelensky is just a comedian. Oh yeah, they did state it in Russia publicly, that he is just a comedian. But if they just asked any janitor or the lowest level in Quarter 95 project that he ran, what kind of a leader he is, anyone from that troop knows that Zelensky is a very tough leader, principled and charismatic but tough leader. And see, in Russia, they never considered that to be flowing back into politics. So that just tells me they're idiots. They either don't read situations or they've lost the last professionals they had. These things they do not divide into, as a psychologist, I want to say that these features of character, they do not change based upon your occupation. If that is your core skeleton, core value, it does not fluctuate depending upon what you're doing. So, unless it's a life-threatening and really changing situation. So, they could have guessed, they could have seen him. And going back again, 95 Quarter, they had a keen understanding of politics because their satire was superb, and they also used it to overthrow and take over some of the politicians. These are the group who used basically Hollywood technology to win the hearts of people and to turn them against the corrupt government. So it's somewhat similar to the Hollywood stars that are visiting. Remember, there was a few years ago, there was a question, so who's going to win, KGB or Comedy Club? And of course, a lot of people in Russia were laughing and saying, of course KGB will kick ass of Comedy Central and Comedy Club. And it just shows that there are a lot of people in Russia who are stuck in the middle of last century. Both Ukrainian and Russian pro-Putin side, they were using the same words, the same language, same statements that Zelensky is just an actor, just a person who's easy to play, and Putin will show him who that guy really is and where his proper place is. And even now, some people are still saying that the main win of Zelensky, the main thing that he did right was that he did not flee. And everybody else is working. He is just the banner that did not fold. Well, I'm curious how long it'll take them to understand that they're still being wrong. That they're drawing some alternate reality and not really trying to understand the current situation. That Zelensky is the one playing that piano. So again, despising someone is a very bad technology. When you're going that way, remember, you are on a quicksand and you likely drown. You can afford many things in your life to yourself, but whenever you start despising somebody, this is a wrong tool to use. This is a fear talking in you. And life is sort of a lady who does not like cowards. And cowards get punished. So that's what's happening now with the Russian top and the Ukrainian opposition, who are trying to work in the political field using different means like Russian propaganda. And you can hear they're saying the same statements. All right, what to say, Alexey Nikolaevich? We have 480,000 watching us live, and I'm watching their chat. It appears they are delighted to listen to your scientific lecture on psychology. I suspect we'll have a chance tomorrow to continue. We've been 42 minutes live on air, so we can stay live till morning, but we don't do that. We're trying not to. So we have day 67 tomorrow, and we'll see you again at 10 p.m., of course. And Alexey is singing that song from the comedy show. That was the lead titles. And Angelina, if she gets to Kiev, please hug her for me. Yes, I'll decisively come to her, shake her hand, and say it's not even from me, it's from Mark. It's not from me, it's from another guy. All right, everyone, thank you very much. And see you tomorrow, 10 p.m. Moscow, Kiev time.